And we're live. Yay. Hello. Good day wherever you are in the world. Welcome to our first fireside chat of the season of the second cohort of the Design Science Studio, our educational incubator for artists who are propelling a regenerative and just future for all life over the course of the coming decade and for the generations to come. Really excited because today our first artist to kick it off is Benjamin Von Wong, who is a new dear friend, but more than that, longtime inspiration. And his work lies at the intersection of fantasy and photography, combining everyday objects with shocking statistics. It's attracted the attention of corporations like Starbucks and Dell and Nike, and has generated over 100 million views for causes like ocean plastics, electronic waste, and fashion pollution. Most recently, he was named one of Adweek's 11 content-branded masterminds. He's also the host of the Top 5% podcast called Impact Everywhere, and a creative advisor for the Sustainable Ocean Alliance and the Ocean Plastic Leadership Network. Today's session is sort of part online live stream and part internal with our creators from cohort 1 and cohort 2 of the Design Science Studio. And so we'll begin with this artist spotlight, and at a certain point we'll close the stream and come back to our inner space where we can workshop and actually learn some of the tools that Von Wong has been refining. So super excited, and caveat, I know that you're on the road, so if the internet gets funky, we will just hang out if you need to restart or anything, but super excited to be kicking this day off together with you, and thank you for joining us.
Amazing. Alrighty, so as I said before, I am currently in a Starbucks, so hopefully it is not too noisy and the internet is stable. The way I have things lined up, I have about a 45-minute give or take presentation that I would love to share with you guys today. Just give you a little bit of context into what I do, who I am, what the journey was like, and what lessons were learned along the way. And then from there, we'll kind of flow into the more workshop-y section of things that maybe will be interesting to have a conversation around. I think we're holding kind of the Q&A portion for after the live stream, so that we don't drag everyone through our questions. So anyways, I'm going to get started over here, sharing my screen. If for whatever reason things aren't working, colors are wrong, or otherwise, just interrupt, let me know so that I don't just go on talking to myself. So anyways, my name is Benjamin Von Wong. I'm an activist, and the kind of work, oh my goodness.
It is doing a weird thing. Is it a Google Slides presentation? Because I can do it for you.
I literally just got Zoom quit unexpectedly.
Oh, but you're still here.
I'm here.
I see you. I hear you.
Can you see my screen?
I can see your screen, yeah.
Okay, so things are still moving?
Right now, yeah, it's going to the inside of your straw installation.
Beautiful. I keep talking even though it said Google's crashed. But it keeps saying it, actually. Zoom quit unexpectedly.
Is your presentation in a PowerPoint?
No, it's a PowerPoint. It's a PowerPoint. Should I leave and come back? Or?
If you want to try, yeah. That could be fun. Cool. Well, I know some of you who have joined.
I'm back.
Oh, you're back. Perfect. Hi. That was fast.
Can you make me a co-host again so I can continue the conversation?
Yeah, you are co-hosted.
All right. So sorry, guys. Of course, technical difficulties are abound. All right. We're trying this again. Great. So my name is Benjamin Von Wong. I'm an artist and activist. This is the kind of work that I create. What you're looking at is a photograph, and the emotion that I try to create every time someone looks at my work is a question. I want them to look at this and wonder, like, wait, what am I looking at? Is this real? Is this fake? And I think this sense of curiosity is something that's really important in the world, because once people are curious, that gives you the opportunity to have a conversation. Suddenly you're not talking to them, you're talking with them, because they're asking the question and they want to know what's behind the story. And so in this case, when someone asks, wait, what am I looking at? I get to say, well, actually, this is an art installation that I built. It's a physical thing. And the reason why the art installation is glowing is because we have these LED lights behind behind this layer of plastics, and there's some wood holding the whole thing up together. And actually, this was built with the help of volunteers, hundreds of volunteers that came in to help us over the course of a couple months, because I don't actually know how to build anything on my own. I need help from others to do it. And those little things that you see them playing around with, they're actually straws, 168,000 straws to be exact, that we collected off the streets of Vietnam, that we cleaned, organized, sorted by color, and then stuck together in order to build this art installation that is now a Guinness World Record for the world's largest supported straw installation. And so I think like art has this really interesting power that facts really just do not. That isn't to say that facts aren't important. I think that facts are really important, but art has this ability to ignite a sense of curiosity and conversation in a way that facts just don't quite do. And so for me, I try to find different ways to take facts and pair them with different community initiatives. So I try to work with different folks. In this case, this was with Georgetown University to tackle the topic of microfiber pollution. And I like to think of things in metaphors. So if the clothing that we wear, which is made out of polyester, nylon, spandex, which is kinds of plastics, well, what would it look like? What would that actually mean if you're trying to bring it to life? Well, that means that the clothing that we're putting into the laundry machines that are coming back are actually coming back to haunt us and attack us. And so how can we create an art installation that will ignite a sense of curiosity that will spark that conversation? I try to tackle different topics. They span generally topics of overconsumption, things that are maybe a little bit boring for some. And through that sort of exploration, I try to find interesting ways to represent that. So in this case, tried to do a project around electronic waste and how, for me, I don't actually know any of these facts. These are sort of facts that I discover as a byproduct of researching, well, what can I do with a certain amount of material? And over the course of time, we'll figure out what to do with it. So in this case, Dell reached out to me and they said, hey, Ben, we have the world's largest electronic waste recycling program. We can give you access to all the trash that we collect. What might you do? What could you come up with? And the first thing that I always try to do is try to think of things once again in metaphors. How can you create emotions of familiarity in a space of exploration that is very unique and different? So one of the first things that I did was for one of the concepts was take these laptops, organize them in a spiral pattern that I thought was very reminiscent of the opening scene of Blade Runner 2049, these solar fields that I thought really represented the concept of harnessing the past to power the future. We created a wall in the back out of mice, cables, and adapters that looked a little bit like the internal of circuit boards. And then we had a character. There's always a human character, always a human piece of the puzzle that I kind of just stole some references from Tron with the help of some other body painting artists like Alison Blue and Tansen Ray. And then combine them all together, and then suddenly you have something that's very different. So although you're taking familiar elements from different parts of culture, you're putting them into a combination that the world hasn't seen before. And that sort of dance between the novel and the familiar is, I think, where kind of you get the chance to create something that is extraordinary and different. So I truly believe that art has the power to kind of ignite conversations and get people to feel something when they wouldn't normally feel it. And I think that's why I'm really excited to be a part of this community and to be here together in community with all of you guys. I want to kind of go back, I think, and just talk through my journey as an artist and how I got to where I am, because I think a lot of the work that I create today is wildly specific to what I do. But the approach and the strategy that I have to create these projects are actually things that have been accumulated over time. And I just thought if I shared some of these, it could get us quicker to the point, and hopefully you'll gain some insights that you can apply to your practice, whatever it happens to be. So I first started photography in 2010. I started it for just because I was looking for a hobby. A girl recently broke up with me, and I was just looking for a way to have an emotional outlet. When I first started, I was using Photoshop as a means of expression, and Photoshop was kind of this really easy way that was low resource, low cost in order to do something. I could just take selfies of myself and then use Photoshop to transform that into something a little bit more interesting. And so it was sort of photography as therapy and Photoshop as a tool to express myself. And I would just go online, find tutorials and pick those up along the way. As I got a little bit better and I got a little bit more self-confidence, I was able to reach out to different folks online, models, friends, families, rope them into my little explorations and experiments. And I think at this point, it was really about trying to see the world differently. How could you look at the world around you and transform ordinary things into extraordinary segments? So whether that was an excavator on the left, a piece of graffiti that I would find and take up newspapers, throw them up into the air in the middle, or my tool shed on the right, I started to realize that the world is very much what you make of it. And if you just took the time to look and see and observe, you could find pretty spectacular things. And then you could sculpt that with the tools you had available to you. So in my case, those were the camera, lighting, as well as Photoshop. And then finally, I guess the third phase of this evolution was sort of this attraction towards practical and special effects. I started to be like really gravitate towards real world effects. I just thought there was something really fun and magical about it and mysterious. And so I would start playing with different real world materials and try to incorporate them into my photographs. So on the left, you have flour, just cooking flour. And I learned that, if you use cooking flour, it can look like smoke, but you really don't want to do this in your own studio because it's impossible to clean up. In the middle, we have liquid latex that, you could create this really cool Spider-Man looking effect. But if you put that on someone's face without putting Vaseline first, you're going to rip out their eyebrows when you remove it. So if you guys ever want to try this out, make sure to use Vaseline. And then the final shot on the right was an experiment and exploration with light painting. We just used birthday sparklers and we just drew a bunch of lines around. And I also learned that those birthday sparklers, even if they're child friendly, can actually burn you. So you want to be quite careful with that, not get it too close to someone's skin. And so as I was kind of going through these explorations, just amassing, I think what we would want to call like a working towards mastery, working towards experience, working towards understanding the tools we have at our disposal. I think there was this side of me that was also really trying to figure out, well, how do I get more attention? This was in the earlier days where Facebook was still just kind of growing. And so it was just, the drive to get more likes, comments, and shares was definitely something that was very prevalent. And I think there's just this sense that if I had more likes, if I had more people commenting and sharing my stuff, that I would get more access to cool people, more access to opportunity, more access to potential financial capital. And I was doing all of this while I still was holding down a day job. And so there was this space and time for exploration and experimentation. And as I was exploring and experimenting, like out of all these 3 different projects, there was like one in particular that stood out. And it wasn't because it was a better photograph than any of my other work. It was because I actually had taken the time to document it. So this photo here on the left, out of those 3, and actually out of any of the projects that I had created at the time, got the most visibility out of any other one. And it was because I had taken the time to document the process. The girl that I was dating at the time just thought it would be an interesting idea to film me using a camera that we just bought and subsequently returned because we couldn't afford to keep it. And it just seemed to be like, it was a very interesting thing to see how the documentation of a project created a whole lot of attention. And so because I had a video that explained how these projects were created, it suddenly gave people something worth sharing. It gave photography blogs a reason to share my work. And so the same photo that I took now was getting shared all over the place, not because the photo was any better or worse than the others, but because there was another piece of the puzzle. There was a process piece of the puzzle that was really interesting, and it just opened up a whole new audience. And so I started documenting all of these different projects of mine. It didn't matter what I did, whether they were successes or failures. Like this was a project that I tried lighting a person on fire for the first time, and the guy just wasn't burning very well. He should be head to toe in flames. And so there's this like 10-minute video of me failing to light a guy on fire properly. But like those videos just really got me kind of coverage and visibility that I would never have gotten otherwise. And so looking back as to like why these projects actually got more attention, I started to realize that it was because when you share the process of what you do, you're actually shifting attention away from yourself. You're shifting attention to like what other people could do by having a behind the scene video and by trying to share useful information like the journey that you had or the lessons you learned along the way. You're shifting yourself away from being the hero, from trying to be the hero, to actually saying, oh, I'm a guide. I'm the person who has done it before, and this is how you can be the hero. And everyone wants to be the hero. And the guide is actually like a really interesting position to be in. If we look at movies, every hero is never ready for the journey they're ready to face. Like Luke Skywalker needs an Obi-Wan Kenobi. Obi-Wan Kenobi needs a Yoda. Like everybody needs a guide in order to get to that next level. And so people naturally are gravitating towards others who can be the guide for them. And so in that aspect, I think there's something very, very valuable to positioning yourself as a guide and positioning yourself in a way that is asking the question of how can I be useful to others? How can I help them in their journey? And this is true of individuals. This is true of brands. This is true of, you know, art in and of itself. So that's something that I think I've carried with me throughout my journey that I think is a lesson that is still valid today. Some of the biggest Instagram and TikTok accounts that you see are the educational ones, are the ones that share journey, struggles, trials, and tribulations so that others can step into their own space of being the hero of their own journey. So that is the first lesson that I wanted to share. So sometime around 2012, I decided to shift my life, I think, from being a hard rock mining engineer to being a full-time artist. And it wasn't that I wanted to be an artist. I just didn't want to be an engineer anymore. And I wanted to travel the world and I wanted to see things. And so I just started, I found out that like when you're an artist, the world is your oyster. Like you can find any artist community in the world and teach a workshop, and suddenly you have a free plane ticket and a sofa to crash on. And there's just something so wonderful about how small the world can be when you have something to offer and something to give to others. And there's this particular sort of, I think, affection towards the arts and this possibility of unlocking the magical within you. And so I started kind of going around the world creating work. I would find unique and interesting people that I wanted to work with, and try to find different ways to collaborate with them. This was a project that I created in France, and it was actually a byproduct of that fire experiment, that fire failure that I shared on the internet. Basically, when I put that stuntman photo up on the internet, there were a bunch of comments. You know, some people thought it was good, some people thought it was bad. But there was this one guy in particular who left a comment and said, hey, great photos, but your fire work really sucks. And I was like, oh, wait, who's this guy? He knows what he's talking about. It turns out he's a pyrotechnician in France. And I said, hey, I saw your comment. Can we work together somehow? And he just said, sure, absolutely. Just let me know when you come to France. And I put a workshop together to get to France and then created photos. So it turns out, you know, part of creating art, especially when you're a photographer, is that it's collaborative. There's no one, it's not all up to you as an individual to solve all the problems. Sometimes it's just about finding the right collaborators that you can jam and jive with. This was another project that I created while I was in San Francisco. I just put on Facebook, hey, I'm in San Francisco for a couple extra days. I have some free time. Are there any artists I should collaborate with? And this lady's mom reached out to me and said, hey, I think you would like to work with my daughter. She makes these beautiful Burning Man outfits, these ceremonial dresses. And so we ended up just collaborating and pulling a project together. So this was the kind of work that I was creating, I think, at the time when I had first just quit my day job, this desire and attraction to create work that was just beautiful and gorgeous and interesting. But I had a little bit of a problem, and that was that although I was doing a really good job of reaching the creative community, I wasn't doing a very good job at reaching the rest of the world. I think looking back at the time, you know, I was doing all these kind of educational tutorials, but although the work was beautiful, it just wasn't doing a very good job of spreading. And I think that I was only able to understand why it wasn't working until I had a success under my belt. And that was after I decided to tie a model 30 meters underwater in a shipwreck in Bali. So I was invited to Bali by my parents. They really wanted us to do a family vacation, and I really don't like vacation. And I was just desperately looking for something to do. And I learned that there was a shipwreck And I was like, oh, cool. I should definitely get my diving license to go check out the shipwreck. But if there's a shipwreck, I should really do a photo shoot. And if I want to do a photo shoot, I need a model. And if I need a model, then I need a dress. And then one thing cascaded to another. And within the next day of getting my dives license, we actually tried to pull this photo shoot off, and it ended up pretty awesome. Where we're able to tie these models 30 meters underwater in a shipwreck. And I think the difference between this project and my other projects, so this one went completely viral. I think it got 2 million views within a week, and it was actually trending on Facebook, on the sidebar of Facebook, back when Facebook still had trending. And I was totally caught off guard as to like why this project was more successful than my other projects. I think objectively speaking, they weren't necessarily more beautiful or better than the others. But I think what this one had that the others don't have is that it had words that could easily describe what they were. All right, there's a single sentence, which is like, do you want, like, if I was sitting next to someone in a bar and I said, do you want to see this photo that I took where I tied a model 30 meters underwater in a shipwreck in Bali? Like, you want to see that photo even before, even before I show it to you. And so there's this headline that is intrinsically built to it, whereas the other photos didn't quite have that, right? You can't say, do you want to see a girl in a giant bird costume sitting on a rock? Or do you want to see a guy spitting fire? It's just like not quite as compelling as this one. And so although I'm a visual artist, and I think many of the people in this room are probably visual artists, the words that we use to describe what we do are equally important. And that's something that I think we can very often overlook. I have another example of how words matter. I did this project as a commercial project for a company called SmugMug. They do websites like my website, vonwong.com, is a SmugMug website, just portfolio websites. And they asked me if I could come and help take some photos of their employees showing off their guns. So on the left, we have the CEO. In the middle, we have his wife. On the right, we have it was their head of marketing. And so it's like, oh, these are some pretty cool shots, black and white, very epic. And my title when I launched this series at the time was the $30 trick to epic portraiture, or something along those lines, because it was just garden sprinklers and black and white shots with some good lighting that made this shot possible. And so, it did fairly well on photography blogs. It spread around the photography and the educational space, but it did a terrible job of reaching a wider demographic. And it's obvious why, because the title was targeted towards a demographic that was purely photographical, right? Nobody else cares what the $30 trick to taking these photos are. And so I think 6 months later, I ended up relaunching this exact same project a second time. So the exact same photographs spread in a different way. But this time we retitled the series Ordinary People, Hollywood Budgets, and we launched it on the 1st of January, which is when everyone makes their New Year's resolutions to go to the gym. And suddenly a completely different crowd ended up picking this up. Like all the health blogs started picking this up because there was this whole discussion on whether or not you needed to go to the gym or just hire a photographer to do the job. And we focused instead of focusing on the final result, we focused on the transformation of ordinary people into extraordinary athletes through the power of photography. And so the words that we use to describe the projects that we create really, really matter. And so I think since that point, I really started to pay attention to what is the headline behind each and every one of my projects. How are people going to talk about it? What words are they going to use to describe this? And does the headline that I create actually appeal to the demographic that I'm trying to reach? Because if you're an artist and you want patrons to find you, then you don't necessarily want to create content that will appeal to other artists. You want to create content that will appeal to other patrons, and so on and so forth. So that was probably the second biggest lesson that I've tried to incorporate inside of all of my work. And so with that kind of like perspective, I just started doing all these other projects, like putting a model, recreating a world, recreating a real world Beauty and the Beast shot inside of the world's largest monastic library, putting superheroes on the edge of a 40-story skyscraper. And these titles eventually attracted the attention of big brands and companies, as they do. to sell product. And so this was probably the largest campaign image of my career. I was hired in 2015 by Huawei to create an advertising campaign for this new cell phone that they created. And so this entire shot was created in a cell phone. I got my face on the side of this massive building in London. And I think this was like a cathartic moment for me, where I realized that, you know what, this is kind of boring. It's kind of pointless. Like, where do I go from here? I think I had in my mind that I wanted to be a successful commercial photographer, but when I was starting to get, starting to taste a little bit of that success, I just felt like I was in meetings all the time, just trying to help people move product off a shelf. And so even in the event of tremendous success, what did I have to look forward to? The next project that was going to get more money on to sell more product, the next project to get more money to sell more product. And it just felt like this hamster wheel that I wasn't really interested in. And so I started at that point to think about, like, what were the projects that I was most proud of being a part of? What was something that I truly wanted to, like, invest the next couple years of my life in? Like, how do I reorient myself so that this really matters? And I started to think back to, like, the different projects that I'd done that I really held dear to my heart. And it was projects like this one that actually have nothing to do with fantasy, but everything to do with impact. This was a video that I made for a family whose little girl was dying of a terminal degenerative brain disease. And their father had found me on the internet because I created some stuff that had gone viral. And he was just like, hey, I know you're a photographer, but could you come by and try to help make a video that can tell the story of what our little girl is going through, which is basically Sanfilippo syndrome, where it's like a children's Alzheimer's, that by the age of 3-4 years old, you slowly lose the ability to walk, talk, and speak until you eventually just die in tremendous pain and suffering around your teenage years. And it was like, wow, this sucks. I'm not a videographer, but I'd love to come by and try. If no other videographer steps forward. So I ended up flying myself over there, staying on their sofa for a week, and then making a video. And within a month, we ended up raising $1 million. By the end of the year, we raised $2 million for this rare disease that no one had ever heard of before. And it was like the most funded campaign on GoFundMe. And I was like, wow, this feels like impact, right? Like, this feels like something that I want to dedicate my life towards. This feels like something where, I can see why art matters in the world. I can see why stories matter in the world. I can see why, people need people like us in order to put projects together. But there's a little bit of a gap, because although I knew that I wanted to do more good, it wasn't very clear how this documentary lifestyle and my fantasy life would kind of coincide. They're two kind of clashing different worlds. In some ways, we think of sustainability, we think of environment, we think of causes as these kind of sad stories. And I was, like, very much attracted to big epic stories. And so I just I didn't really know where to start. But I think, as with most things in life, if you make a commitment to say, this is something that's important to me and I'm going to stick to it, then the answers slowly but surely come. So in my case, I just, basically took a sabbatical, told myself that I was going to just, from 2016 onwards, I wasn't going to accept any project that didn't have an impact component to it, didn't know how it was going to work. And I just stuck by it and waited to see what would happen. My original idea was to just knock on the doors of a bunch of nonprofits and offer them to do campaigns for free. Turns out nobody wants free campaigns when you've never really done them before. They didn't really trust that I understood enough about the cause. No one had time to invest in new, unexpected ideas that had never been done before. Nonprofits are pretty risk averse. And so nothing in my bio screamed collaboration, unfortunately. And so it was really up to me to figure out what I wanted to do. Around that time, I started to watch a bunch of documentaries, and my partner came up with this idea of using storms as a metaphor for climate change. And I thought, oh, hey, this is like a pretty interesting idea, right? So big brewing storms as a metaphor for climate change was something, and just people in front ignoring what was going on just seemed like an interesting idea that was worth experimenting with. And so we ended up going storm chasing for a couple of weeks in the Great Plains, using these storms as backdrops. We would have 5 to 10 minutes to set up a shot. And just, we used the ambulance that one of my followers just happened to have, who came to assist. as a storage container that we could just put things in, take them out, take the photo, and move on to the next, to capture these images. And while these images weren't necessarily the best images of my career, they made me understand that actually, within the impact space, there is an opportunity to tell stories. There is an opportunity to use art as a vehicle to start conversations. Like, we can create metaphors for very important things and reach a completely different segment of the population. And so I started looking for like any opportunity everywhere I went, and like, how could I use the opportunities that I had in front of me, and leverage those to create work that was new and aligned with my interests. So when I was invited to do a photography workshop in Fiji, I started asking around, like, what is there to do in Fiji? And someone said, well, there's some like world-class shark dives. And I was like, oh, sharks. What about sharks need help? And so, I'm sure you guys all know problems with shark fin soup and the amount of overfishing that goes on in the oceans. And I just thought, what, maybe I can use sharks as a way to start, ignite conversations underwater. And so I already knew how to tie models underwater. Why not tie models underwater with some sharks swimming around? That seemed like a good idea. And so what we ended up doing, I bought this shepherd's crook, found a model who's like an electrician by day and a world-class freediver by night. A bunch of shark scientists that we managed to find on the island, and some sponsors who came on board to like just host us, and created this series. Tied a model underwater, waited for sharks to swim around, snapped the photo, and pray, and eventually ended up creating this entire campaign that generated 80,000 petition signatures. And so, because no nonprofit wanted to work with me off the start, I ended up just creating the campaign and then backtracking after having created the shots. Went to look for the nonprofits and said, hey, I have this series of images. I'm going to launch it. I have this video. I have these photos. Do you want to collaborate with us? And so it's sort of this like reverse way of getting what we wanted, and just kind of focusing on that and narrowing down. And so I just wanted to take a moment now, and I'm not sure if my Wi-Fi is going to support it, but we're going to give it a shot. I just wanted to share a video of what it looks like to bring these campaigns together, because I think there's this sort of like maybe assumption that it takes infinite amount of resources to pull these big projects together. But the truth is, I think, as most of you guys can probably attest to, is that these projects can be really, really scrappy, and how we present them is often a very different story to how they're created. And so I thought I would just kind of share a behind the scene video that would give you guys a little bit of insight into what this actually looks like. So fingers crossed it works well.
How do you get people to talk about something that is ordinary, ugly, and boring? I wasn't too sure, but from experience, I know that the internet loves to see things that are extravagant, unique, and different. So applying that same concept to plastic bottles, having 10,000 of them seemed like a great start at making something ordinary into something extravagant. With more plastic than fish in the sea scheduled for 2050, it made sense to add an ocean component to the project. A sea of plastic was interesting and sad, but it needed something unique and beautiful to truly stand out. What more unique and beautiful to represent the ocean than a mermaid? And so with the help of a waste management center called Tomra and a local artist called Cynthia, we ended up with 10,000 plastic bottles that came in a 50-foot truck, along with a beautifully designed, handmade mermaid tail. This unexpected combination, I felt, had the potential to be something truly different. So with all three components to make things shareable, the extravagant, the unique, and the different, I felt like we had all of the ingredients necessary to create something that could potentially make the boring topic of plastic pollution more shareable. As the shoot deadline creeped forward, dozens of volunteers joined us in our quest, contributing whatever they could, from helping us clean and delabel thousands of bottles, to rigging up my camera to the ceiling with plywood and pulleys, to borrowing a 52-inch TV from Costco. For the Mermaid, talented artists came together to transform our beautiful model into a believable mermaid. And before I knew it, all the pressure was on me, waiting to see if the concepts would work or just be flushed down the drain. As the day flew by, volunteers worked tirelessly, pushing bottles around, collecting them, organizing them by color before tossing them right back out onto the floor to create a new set of patterns that some crazy photographer had told them to do. Slowly but surely, an extravagant, unique, and different series appeared, just like I had hoped. But deep in the back of my mind, one nagging thought remained. How much difference could a series like this possibly make in encouraging people to stop using plastic bottles? Honestly, I'm not sure, but I guess I'm about to find out.
Yeah, so this was one of the projects, I think, maybe one of the ones that actually launched me into the sustainability space, which I know is not quite the same as regeneration, but we'll get there towards the end of this. But this was a project that I created simply because I happened to be in Montreal at the time when my sister was getting married, and my mom found this mermaid tail designer, and I thought it would be cool to try to pull something together. So it really came together within a 2-week span. Building the videos took a lot longer. But this ended up generating, I think, like 37 million views at the time. And it was just right at the time when the Great Pacific Garbage Patch had been discovered. And so there's really a hunger and a desire for content like this that I think really helped it spread. And so it's really interesting to me how art in its impact, like there's never any guarantee that it can make a difference, but sometimes you just never know. By doing what you believe in, you can ultimately hit a vein that that really resonates with society and can truly shift things forward. For me, I think one of the realizations that I started to have soon after the project was that creating projects like this required a lot of time, energy, and effort, and just building these one-offs wasn't necessarily quite worth it, because you'd be spending all this energy just to take a photograph. And what if you could maybe explore and experiment with the idea of creating a set so that anyone else could take their photograph, right? If we look at trends, everyone today owns a cell phone. So what if you can give everyone the opportunity to have this canvas where they can express the things that are valuable to them? And so I've explored and experimented this idea of transforming my photos into installations where I would create the set, but I would create the set so that anyone else could use it too at the same time. I think there's something really interesting about this open sourcing of art that is possible in today's world as everyone becomes increasingly creative. So rather than think of other creatives as competition, think of them as allies. How can we leverage the fact that everyone is a creative, that everyone is an influencer, that everyone can has a voice that could be amplified? And in my latest project, this one just launched, I think 2 weeks ago, where I created a giant faucet with plastics flowing out of it. I really tried to bring to life this phrase that we hear a lot in the plastic space, in the sustainability space, which is we need to turn off the plastic tap. And so I thought, well, we have this phrase that is said all the time, but what is the visual for it? Can we use art as an opportunity to complete a phrase, to give people a visual anchor that they can use? And what if I took this phrase and I started taking it literally, like we need to turn off the plastic tap to plastics in the ocean. We need to turn off the plastic tap for the sake of the next generation. We need to turn off the plastic tap because recycling alone is just not enough. And so taking this symbol, moving it around, kind of, I guess, blending the boundaries between photography and installation. But of course, this is during COVID. These were created in Montreal while curfews had just ended. So it was definitely a little bit of a challenge, but how do you make this possible for everyone else in the world to get engaged and get involved? And so in this case, we were thinking about it. Yes, this art installation is in France right now where people could take selfies in front of, but how do you make this available to the rest of the world? And so we, cut out this giant faucet and gave this symbol to others to reinterpret however they want. And the remixes that have come out of this have been absolutely phenomenal. By giving everyone the opportunity to participate in things, I think we become bigger than the sum of our parts. And people take this in all sorts of unexpected ways, whether it's doing what looks like entire illustrations or actually creating miniatures in order to complete the narrative. And I think there's just so much power and possibility when you take art and you blend it all together. And so I think in some way, and this is what I was missing when I was trying to when I had a day job as an engineer, this concept of ikigai, which is the balance between, you know, what you love, what you're good at, what you can get paid for, and what the world needs. And I think this idea of ikigai is one that we can all constantly strive towards. I don't think it's something that we can actually hold on to. So in the sense that, you know, the work that we create will always have to evolve, because what the world needs, what you're good at, and what you can get paid for will consistently change. Actually, what you love will also change. And so this is not really a destination as much as it is a journey that we should all, that we all need to work towards. And I guess I want to touch upon quickly this idea of crisis, because it's something that I think we've all probably experienced thanks to COVID, if not directly, then indirectly. And it's something that we've probably all experienced during our lives. In my case, you know, as somebody who creates art installations that are anchored in the physical world, with the help of volunteers and large groups of people, with the purpose of gathering larger groups of people, you know, COVID was definitely something that really, really sucked. But I think we need to think of crisis as maybe a mixture of danger and opportunity. And I think that the characters in Chinese, which break out those two notions of danger on the left and opportunity on the right, really represents that well. You know, when we break down our challenges as creatives and we work through them, we are working through one crisis after another. If I take my own journey, you know, in the beginning of my career, I was creating beautiful work that I think was technically good, but it just wasn't getting the visibility that it needed in order for me to survive. You know, that was essentially a crisis. As I got a little bit better and I started getting hired for the work that I wanted to do, I realized that, you know, although this work was cool, like, you know, getting paid to tie a model 30 meters underwater, this time in a cenote in Mexico, and, you know, creating this image for a whiskey brand, it's cool, but it had no meaning. And so that, you know, once again, was another kind of a pivot that I had to work through. So another kind of a crisis again. And then as I started getting into the impact space, I really wanted to create pieces that had meaning and purpose to it. But along the way, I made a ton of mistakes. Like, this was an image that I tried to take through Bhutan. And I just had this belief that if more people travel, the world would be better, right? Like this very simple idealistic thing. And so we dressed up my friend who was traveling with us, who's a fellow photographer called Elia Lacardi, dressed him up and took these photographs that are really beautiful. But, you know, at the end of the day, the images just look like a white Jesus colonizing a bunch of Asian people, which, you know, is definitely not the right message to be sharing. And so this series never actually hit, you know, I never actually released it because, you know, it was a mistake, but you have to kind of go through and make these mistakes. And so like figuring out how to integrate impact into fantasy and figuring out how to make that work was equally a crisis that I had to work through. And then along the way, I was doing this plastic stuff. I found it. I was able to create photos and videos that I thought were working, but I started to see that the value of each individual piece of content was going down over time, that I had to like pivot away from that if I wanted to survive. You know, that too is a crisis. So I then decided that I wanted to make art installations and I wanted to drop photography altogether. So I ended up creating this at a conference, which was representative of how many clothes we wear in a single lifetime. And it was really cool. Like I created this installation and people could go and see it. And I was like, this is wonderful. Maybe I can make this travel the world. Only to realize that every single time you tear down the art installation and move it around, that's an entire installation. It's a brand new installation that needs to be made. So you don't really get that much efficiency. And so photography and art that is digital actually has significantly longer staying power with a lot less resource consumption. And so like, you know, that too was a crisis. And so really, I just kind of moved through life from one crisis to another that never quite stops. And I think, you know, when you break things down into like weeks or months, in this case, this is what my entire life lived so far looks like on a chart. So the red dots represent me to graduation at 21 years old. So the orange is how long I stayed in my day job. Then I tried making money, and yellow as a photographer. Then I tried to find then I wanted to find impact, and then COVID hit. And so like when you look at your entire life in dots, and you realize that actually these big momentous moments of crisis, like I think the blue on the bottom is COVID, you start to realize like, you know, crisis is sort of just challenges and iteration and all these different things that we try to move towards is really just part of the process. And it's something that we need to work through and just kind of learn from. And that's really all you need. And for me, I think with the pandemic being over and with this realization that, okay, doing these really big epic projects is really fun. They're really symbolic. They have a strong, I think, SEO play and longevity to them. The next phase of what I want to work on, and I guess there's going to be a new series of dots that will soon appear as life continuously trucks on, is like, well, how do I move from the problem space into the solution space, right? And I think that's what a lot of us here are curious about in the design science studio, is like, how do we move from just working on sustainability and move into the space of regeneration? I want to end on like one last story that I think is kind of relevant, and then we can just move it on to Q&A. During the pandemic, I really struggled because I really felt a little bit useless. I felt like I had built this entire career. I basically felt obsolete, like a VCR repairman who, the world's best VCR repairman that had no more VCRs to repair. And I just really like, oh wait, yeah. I just really felt like I didn't know how my skills could be put to use. And so in, I think, January or February of this year, I received this message that someone had like copied my mermaid concept of the beach on plastics in the video that I just showed you. And I was like, oh, super interesting. I want to know who this person is. And I started finding these articles of like a mermaid who had like, this person who dressed up as a mermaid on this terrible beach in Bali that was just, rubbish filled. And so for context, like, this is what happens every single year in Bali. I think 250 tons or so of plastic wash up on the beach every single day, and authorities are cleaning it up, volunteers are cleaning up, and so forth. But it's just like absolutely disastrous situation. And so this lady, her Instagram handle is Laura in Waterland, who's like a zero waste volunteer, decided that it would be a really good idea to get out there and take a drone photo. And I was like, this is wonderful. Like, I love the fact that the art that I create can inspire others. I think that, as artists, we maybe don't want others to copy us or emulate us, but as activists, you really want everyone to copy you. And so, I had the privilege of creating these images inside of like a nice, safe studio. These were plastics that we borrowed from a recycling center and gave back to them so that they could recycle it. And I think most people don't get the chance to do that. And so like, I think when we think of art and we think of success, we often think of it in terms of like headlines, like how many places was I featured on? We brag about the awards that we've won or the fellowships that we've gotten into and so forth. And so like, this is what I think most people associate success with. But I think the kind of success that we should really aspire for, and the kind of success that is really symbolic of activism and transformation, are the headlines that aren't actually written about us. And so a month after that message that I received on Instagram came through, I got this like Google alert in my inbox, and it was like, it was not about me. It was about some random entrepreneur called Huang Ningning, all the way in Wuhan, China, that now everyone knows where Wuhan is, that I had never heard of before. And I was like, wait, why am I on in this article? And it turns out that she is an entrepreneur who quit her day job and started a little upcycling clothing company out of recycled bottles, and now hires like 7 or 8 people. But the reason she credited for starting this company and quitting her day job was like the art that I had created. And it was just like, wow, this is something that I created like 5 or 6 years ago, and it's still making a difference, and it's still getting out there and changing people's lives, because art is new for anyone who's never encountered it before, right? And so when I look at this, stories like this, I get really excited, because this didn't happen because my work was special. This happened because art in itself is an infinite resource, right? It doesn't matter how many people draw from it. It doesn't matter how many people use it. It doesn't matter how many people enjoy it. The art only gets more powerful with every iteration. And I think there's something just truly beautiful about that. And why I think that for everyone here in this room and listening online, why I think there's still a lot of hope for the future. So that's, I guess, what I wanted to say today, little dive into my world. I hope that it was entertaining and not too boring, and that you guys were able to learn a little bit of something. So thank you.
Thank you. Oh, that was incredible. I asked in the chat on see if anyone else might want to ask some questions before we close the stream, because that might be nourishing for others.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Just a quick shout out, because we have a lot of our partners that we're streaming towards, different creative communities. We have Gray Area Foundation for the Arts, as well as the Burners Without Borders community all around the world. In addition to, obviously, the Design Science Studio community, Hub Ritual, and Buckminster Fuller Institute, and Amanda Sage, and the Vision Train community. So there's a bunch of different people watching all around, and then super excited about all of the revolutionaries who are in the space with us now. Whoop, whoop. Yes. So I'm going to pull up ex-Rasma, who had a great question, and I'm going to spotlight you now, if that's okay, Raz.
Definitely.
Perfect. All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing. And my question is, what do you wish you would have known starting out, and what were your biggest blocks, and what helped you overcome them?
What did I wish I had known starting out? I think I wish I would have known how important it was. Oh, I think I wish I would have known that awareness alone doesn't equal change. I think that's something that it took a long time for me to realize, that just getting something seen doesn't mean you're getting anything changed. And it's something that I've been really struggling to figure out how to connect, because as an artist, we often, like, the entire problem solving process is in, like, how do we actually just bring this thing that doesn't exist into existence? But I think when you add the layer of design onto it, then you start thinking of, like, okay, if we think of art as a tool, how can it be part of something greater? And so, like, what is it contributing to solve? And so you start thinking in systems, and you start thinking in ecosystems. And I think it's just a healthier way to think about it, and it's less egocentric. So I think that's maybe the biggest thing that I wish I had known a lot earlier, because I would have redirected my energies very differently. And I wouldn't have chased, I think, metrics that don't matter. So an example of that might be, I have 300,000 followers on Facebook. They're kind of useless in the sense, like, there was a moment in time where it really meant something to have a lot of those followers, because people could see it. And then suddenly an algorithm changed, and now all that is useless. And so it was good at the time, it was not good anymore. But if I had anchored, I think, the work that I created more in real world expectations, instead of saying this project got 30 million views, I could have said this project changed this thing in this part of the world. I think that would have been a far more powerful story and a far more relevant story. What were the other half of the questions?
What were your biggest blocks, and how did you overcome them?
Yeah, I mean, I think I shared, that was, I think that was basically the bulk of the presentation. So the biggest blockers are generally, like, they all revolve around this question of, how do I stay relevant today? How do I keep up with the speed of change that is happening in the world, and the amount of talent and the amount of technology that is constantly changing out there? How do you keep up? How do you stay relevant? And I think that is a question that continues to follow me, and that will probably continue to follow me for the rest of my life. But I think that's the underlying, if I was to summarize every single crisis that I've had, relevance, I think, is the core underlying problem.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Rasma.
You're welcome.
And Rasma's also an incredible photographer and artivist.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Can't wait to see all, like, everyone's work. Definitely stay in touch, everybody.
Yeah, it's great to have different modes too. So I do theraputography, where I combine my background in counseling psychology with helping people be seen. So there's also many ways to use the same medium, and I'm very inspired by you. Thank you.
Amazing. That sounds so cool that you've connected those two pieces, the art and the impact, like, right away. How beautiful.
Wonderful. And this is Forrest Stearns, another incredible artist who is painting right now and is one of the advisors of the Design Science Studio, who has another question.
Hey, Benjamin. Good to see you, my friends. It's been a little bit. But I have a very kind of momentum specific question. Since you and I last asked, you reached out and you're like, what am I doing? And you kind of touched on that a moment ago. How, for all of us here, and we've talked about this in the Design Science Studio, I think it's super relevant. How do you stay motivated in you to get motivated to do the work for all of us?
Yeah, great question. And I don't know if I have kind of a blanket answer for it, but maybe anecdotally, I think it's about understanding what makes you tick as an individual. So I, as an example, am an extrinsically motivated person. I need to be faced with different situations in order to have new ideas enter me. And so during the pandemic, so for 18 months, I was just kind of trapped in a bedroom in Montreal and, in probably the worst place. But in order to make myself stay accountable to meeting people, I started a podcast. I was still reaching out to people, asking for connections, exploring new ideas. I started different practices. Like I figured if I couldn't travel externally, I could start traveling internally. So I picked up meditation, I picked up journaling, I picked up exercise so that I could make time and space for these podcasts so that I could continue being accountable to my own learning. So like, I think there's this tendency to blame external circumstances for not being able to be a certain way. And, certainly I am way happier now that I'm in motion than I was in the past. But I think that, there's a piece of what we do that we can control that we have to really try our best to take control of. And then the rest, there's always going to be an optimal state where you wish like, oh, things could be another way, that might not be within your locus of control. And so, one new thing that I've recently learned as I've just stepped out of the house, I'm traveling in my friend's RV right now, is that I am the best version of myself when I'm in motion. And so this is a realization. And so I would want to figure out how I can prioritize that no matter what happens in the future. And it's something that I wasn't able to understand because I was always traveling for the last decade and it was never taken away from me, but now I know how important it is. And so I think that self-awareness is maybe the biggest piece of the puzzle.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your explanation. I look forward to seeing you. Come visit.
Yeah. Thanks, Forrest.
Thanks, Forrest. So good to see you, friend. Forrest has been such a critical part of the studio. He's such an advocate and supporter. Will come into the sessions, always on the mentor calls. Also just like shows up for the actual sessions that we're doing, curriculum, and asks really good questions. Isn't that what it's about? Sometimes just asking the right questions.
Yeah, the hard one.
The hard ones, right? We're asking questions together, I think, which is an important thing that only art particularly is good at, is helping us reflect. And your work really does that.
Thank you.
So, question for you.
Yes.
We have half an hour. We can do more Q&A maybe after the workshop-y part and maybe close the live stream for now. How does that feel?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay.
Absolutely.
So do you have any closing words for our friends out in the multiverse before we close out the stream?
No, I'm other than just, if you have any questions, reach out. I'm always happy to chat. It's just hi@vonwong.com, or you can just fill up a form at vonwong.info, and then that kind of enters a database so that when I'm traveling through your part of the woods, I can just send a random message and say, hi, I'm in town. Do you want to grab a coffee or something like that? Or which has been wildly helpful.
And so what was that? I'll put it up on the
vonwong.info. So vonwong.info. And then I have a database instead of just a billion emails floating around.
Awesome. That's great. Cool. Yay. Well, I'll put it up on a slide right now. And thank you so much. And it's been really great to be able to share the work and share your journey out into the multiverse for this first part. I think your work is deeply inspirational, and I really appreciate how you went through your journey and the different things that you reconsidered and considered as you move through the process. I think there's something very relatable about your journey and encouraging, especially what feels like devotion, maybe too much strong of a word, but to being open to open sourcing to other people, being inspired by your work and helping it ripple out into the world. That's something that we believe in a lot. So it's really wonderful to see that reflected out. So with that, for anyone who's out there, thank you so much for joining us. It has been a delight. We are going to now close the stream and have an opportunity for the artists in the studio to move through a framework that Von Wong has refined into kind of a simpler format so that others can be able to replicate it and utilize it for the way that they're approaching creating impact-driven artwork. So this has been a Fireside Chat with the Design Science Studio. My name is Roxy. I'm the director and architect, and I'm very grateful. And Design Science Studio is a partnership of the Buckminster Fuller Institute and Habitual with many other creative partners. And it is fueled by everyone who is deeply devoted to this future that works for all life. So join us as we're propelling the Regenaissance, this global movement that's bringing together revolutionary creators like Von Wong and so many of the other voices that hopefully you have connected with, or you will by checking out the artists through our website, designscience.studio, and come together as we're weaving systems thinkers and creators and organizations to imagine, collaborate, and co-create a world that works for all life. So again, if you want to reach out to Von Wong, hi@vonwong.com or vonwong.info, and reach out to us at the Design Science Studio and join the revolution. Thank you. Yay! Now stop the stream.